Okay, Mr. Bunt, just start off with your name and address, please, and age.
Well, I'm John Bunt, 11 Tuscan Close, Grosvenor Park, Widnes, and I'll be 69 on Christmas Day,
Yes, and,
1987.
And today's date is the 14th of December. Could you just tell me your parents' names and addresses if you can remember that?
Well, I lived on West Bank, 52 Viaduct Street. The houses are knocked down now, but I went to West Bank School till I was 14, and then when I left school at Christmas, and I didn't start work at the Soap Works till May the 8th, 1933.
What subjects did you study at school?
Well, only the general student, reading, writing and arithmetic. There's nothing like the facilities they have now, you know.
Any exams?
I didn't do very well in the exams. I didn't go to the central school or the grammar school as was then, but I was out of work for like 6 months doing odd jobs, you know. I worked on a milk cart, delivering milk for a while, you know, just in the mornings.
When was that?
That was Johnson's milk cart. Used to do West Bank, and I used to meet him and deliver milk for about an hour or so. Until I got this job at the Soap Works. It was just one of the first to start there. I actually started before they made soap. You know, they didn't make soap till the middle of May, and I started on the 8th. There was a lot of, all ex-Gossages men that started it, you know, from the top downwards. And
was there any machinery taken from the Gossages?
No. Everything was bought new. I think they started with a capital of about £30,000, and we had 5 soap pans. I started in the soap department, you know, where it was cut and packed, you know. But eventually I did every job in the place, up to the soap boiling and the glycerine plant.
About how many people worked there?
Well, shall I say half of them? Well, they all worked hard. About maybe a dozen or so in the factory, you know. That's not counting office staff. There's 2 or 3 in the office, and then the directors, you know, Mr. Bloomer and Mr. Wright, Dr. Wigner. They were all frightened of Dr. Wigner, and but they gave us 3 years. If it didn't go in 3 years, that was mostly the men, you know. I was only a lad then. I was only 14, but the men, they knew that if it didn't go in 3 years, they'd have to pack in, you know what I mean, because it was all men who'd worked there, you know.
Do you know anything about the processes of making the soap?
Yeah, I've made it. Yeah, I made it right from the start. We made Bob Martin's dog soap from the firm at Southport, and we made specialised soaps that people who are religious people who don't want animal fat in the soap. You have to use all vegetable fats, you see, and you have to use your flats are all blended so that you don't crack the soap, you know what I mean. If you have stuff that's tallow and that's brittle, it'll make a crack at the soap and it'll crack and just break away. So you have to have palm oil or something like that, which is a softer fat to do it. But we started right through the process, you know.
So, could you just tell us what the process was from A to B?
Yeah, well, you mean the making of it?
Yeah.
Well, eventually, after when I eventually was in my 20s, when I was 19 and 20, when I started making it in these pans, in these things, you see. Well, certain fats, we had pans that held about 20 tons, you see, and you had to have working space in that. You put about 6 or 7 tons of mixed fats, sort of, if it was going to be a white soap, you know, you had tallow and coconut oil and bleach fats, like bleach palm oil. You used to bleach the palm oil at Central Oil, Liverpool Central. They bleach the fats so they get a good colour, you see, and that could help to bind it together. And it took a week to make. You had, by adding caustic soda, you see, it saponified the fats and turned them into a commodity called soap. In the process of that, if you had to add salt, because if you didn't add salt, sort of shovelfuls of salt, see, it would all go solid. So you had to keep it, and you had to keep the fats. You boil the fat first, you see. Got the fat boiling, and you added water, caustic, and if it started to get too far ahead with the caustic, and the fats couldn't take it up, boiling fats, the pan would come over the top, even, you know what I mean, all over the floor, you know, and but you had to knock it down by adding water quick through a spray in the middle, and you had salt water brine, which is made to a twaddle of about 40 twaddle, and you knocked it down till it neutralised that caustic, you see, and you kept adding caustic until you'd had sufficient caustic in to saponify all that fat, and it turned into soap. And then all the excess liquor that you put in, you see, with all the water, maybe about 2 or 3 tons of water in the process, what we call grained it out. That was, you added salt or brine, you see, and that broke all the boiling soap up. It's boiling all the time, you see, and until you could put a spade in, a long handle spade, and come out perfectly clean, you see, and you could see all the liquor in between all the cracks. Well, then it was still showing slight blue on a litmus paper that was slightly caustic. That meant to say the fat was all saponified, you see what I mean? There was no fat left. See? Well, that would settle overnight in our case, you see. And the next day, we would pump the liquor that had settled down, you see, off, and that contained glycerine, you see. Now, if the fats were good fats, that like coconut oil and palm oil and that, there'd be, say, 5%, 6% of glycerine, or 7% of glycerine in that, you see, mixed in, you see. So you pump that into a tank, you see. Now then, you were left then, you had to boil this, keep it boiling, get it boiling again. It formed a slight crust on. You had to boil it again, and you added more. You brought it up. If there's any more fat that was not quite saponified, you touched it up with a gallon or so of caustic again, or more, you see, till you got it slightly blue again. In the meantime, adding water to make another lot of liquor, you see. But in later years, we developed a process that came during the war of, you see, let me explain. If you take you wash the soap sometimes 3 times, sometimes 4 times, what we call washing it. You know, that's like washing the glycerine out of it. Because during the war, it was more important to get the glycerine out for explosives, you see, and that sort of thing. In peacetime, it's used for cosmetics, lipsticks and things like that. But we developed a process whereby the first lee you took off probably had 6% glycerine in, you see. Now, when you washed it again, if you used water and everything, your next lee would only be, spent lee you'd call it, you see, spent lee, would only be perhaps 3%. If you washed it again, the next one, maybe 2 or 3 tons of it, would be only 1%. So what we used to do, we had another tank. So the first lee we put in that tank, the second lees off the pans, you see, we put into another tank. Now, instead of using water to make the bulk, to wash it, we're using a weak solution of spent lee, you see, which only contained maybe 2 or 3, by the time the third lees had gone in, maybe 1 or 2% lee, but you wasn't adding water, you was adding glycerine just by strengthening it, you see, and washing your soap that way, you see, washing the impurities out and things like that. Then you pump these in a tank, you see. At that time we used to send it to Crossfields, and they used to have a glycerine plant, and they evaporated it into got the glycerine out, you see. But later years we had our own.
Where was that other place?
Eh?
What's the other place?
Crossfields at Warrington.
At Warrington.
Yeah, you know Crossfields, just over the bridge. I used to go to Crossfields there, and they used to, in a tanker, road tanker, Pickfords used to take it, and they used to deliver it to Crossfields, and they'd evaporate it there. But later on we had our own glycerine plant, which we, double effect glycerine plant, which I worked eventually. And but as I say, you strengthen these leads up. You wash the soap 3 times. Now, after you'd washed it the third or fourth time, you thinned it out a little bit, you see, and you what we call fitted it. That with a brickish towel. You got it a certain, which you know, only experience of getting, till you tried it, and a flake of sort of came off the towel, you see. If it broken up, you added water to close it up because it was too rough. If it was too sticking on the towel, you added salt water, see, to break it up a bit, you see, so that it just come off. And then you let it settle for a day or 2 days. And then after that, the pans, if you ever see them, they had a tap on the bottom, and they had a tap on the side of the tank, but it had like a pipe inside, you see, on a swivel. So when the crust had formed on the top, you cut this crust with your spade, and you lowered your skimmer, as we call it, in, you see, just under the surface. Now, when we called it cleansing, that was like pumping the liquid soap into a mixer, you see. So you skimmed it off the top, because all the residue, about 2 tons of sort of excess caustic and residue, would drop into the bottom of the pan, you see. And you skimmed this off, and you pumped it into a mixer, you see, and you could add perfume, colour, and anything to it there, you know what I mean. And then it was mixed, the colour and the perfume.
Do you know what perfumes were added?
Well, we use Java Citronella generally for household soaps, you see, and this was run down the chute into what you'd call metal boxes on wheels, which held about 1,200 weight of the soap, you see. You had to watch they didn't leak, sort of thing. The fellow stuffing leaks and things like that. But then, after about 3 or 4 days, this cooled, you see, and the sides and the ends could be taken off, and you're left with a block of soap, you see, about 5 foot high, 18 inches wide, you see, 15 inches wide. And this was then run to machines, and it was cut into slabs and then into bars, you see, and stamped and so on. But then if you were, later on when we had a flaking machine which was built by Baker Perkins of Peterborough, this was the first of its kind in the country. Lever Brothers had one, but they had to make the soap and make it into solid blocks first, and then cut it and then feed it into their machine before it would make soap flakes, you see. But ours was the first one that made it from the liquid soap. So when I talk about cleansing the pan when it was for making soap flakes, we pumped it into another storage tank that would last all day, you know, maybe 6 tons. We used to get off our pans from the fats we put in, we would get about 6 tons of soap, you see, and have about 2 tons left, which was thin Niger, what we call Niger. All the residue in, you see, was thin soap, but it could be washed afterwards and topped up on. But we get about 6 tons. Well, we could pump, if it was making white flakes or brown flakes, we could pump this directly to this storage tank, and that fed all day into a trough which cut it into soap flakes. It was like a mangle, as you might say, only it had a big roller at the bottom which was water cooled, and the top roller which was heated going opposite ways, and a trough on the top. So this liquid soap went in, And the distance between the top roller and the bottom roller was the thickness of the flake, salt flaking, and that's mighty thin, you know, like a paper thin, more or less. But you could make it thicker or thinner, you know, by lowering the rollers on top roller onto the bottom one. The bottom roller was water cooled, see. The top roller was heated. So as the trough was there, it was taking a thin skim of soap onto the bottom roller, and as it went half the circumference, there was two sets of knives. One were like a fork blade, you know, about 4 foot across or so, and this cut a ribbon off, and the second blades cut the rest of it off, so you had two ribbons of soap flakes coming off, you see, about half an inch wide, and a continual that was unbroken, you know, just unbroken soap, you know, which went then up through a machine. It took about half an hour to go through 3 conveyor belts, and came off at the end, dropped into sacks as soap flakes. They were more or less broken up, you see. But the other soap from the other end, when it went into blocks, was cut up, you see. And later on, these soap flakes, see, because the soap is like dried, see, it's then dried, we then had a toilet process, because with a piece of household soap, you know what I mean, there's moisture in it, see, you know what I mean, there's water in it, see, so you can press your fingers in it. We don't see much of it now. You don't see any of it really, because people, before washing powders and detergents came out, people used to buy a bar of soap and did the washing and washed yourself with it and everything, you know what I mean, the same soap. But now they have toilet soap, which has to go through a different process. It's more or less made into soap flakes, and then it's sent to the toilet department, and it's put into mixers, into a mixer. The soap flakes, maybe 100 weight or so, is put into a mixer, and they add perfumes and colour, and in certain instances you can put oatmeal in it and make oatmeal soap or things like that, you know what I mean. And from the mixer, you see, he's making it slightly, and if it's white flakes, you can make a nice pink soap from it, or you can make a nice green soap, you see, depending on the colour they put in. And then it's passed that from there into a mill. It's like it mills it, you know what I mean, and passes it through, forces it through either a square nozzle, a round nozzle, and then to make compressed in, it's passed into a, let's see, how did it do it? They passed it from a mixer into a mill, they ground it all up, see, and then they put it into another machine which compressed it and pushed it out into a solid and long strip, and it was cut up and stamped as toilet soap, like you'd see toilet soap, Lux and Camay and all them, you see. And but that's more or less the process.
What type of hours and pay?
Pardon?
What hours and pay did you work?
Well, when we started, we worked 48 hours a week. We worked from 7:30 till 5 o'clock in the weekday, and Saturday morning 7:30 till 12 o'clock. It was 48 hours. I started, and my take-home pay was 9 shillings and 8 pence in old money. You know, which is less than 50 pence now. My wages were 50 pence.
Was that good for the time? Or?
That was for 48 hours.
Yeah.
And I had to pay 4p stamps, you know, 4p for stamps. My take-home pay was 9 and 8 pence. The men, they got about £2 or £2.50 was the maximum they got. That was for a 48-hour week.
Were the women working there?
No, we didn't have any women. We didn't have any women working there at all at that time. Only in the lab and the offices, you know. I mean,
About how many women?
There was one lady in the lab, and there was 2, I think, in the office. I think I can remember the name of the lady in there. She'd be dead long time because she was middle-aged when I started in 1933. Louis Atkin, her name was, wherever she was from. And of course, I knew all the men that worked there, you know. I could name them, you know. Well, in the first place, in the foreman in the soap house that I started with was a man named Reg Harding. He lived in Fairfield Road, and he'd been a foreman on the loading stage at Gossages. And there was a man lived in St Mary's Road named George McCaig. He was the man there, and the lad that started with me, there was only 2 of us started, was a lad named Ernie Bate from West Street, and we were the only ones in the soapery. And then there was about 6 months after we started, there was a chap from the grammar school named Adel Starmer. He was a couple of years older than us, and he went into the pan room where he was to learn to make the soap, you see. Now, you see, when you start with the fats, it didn't come a year later, you know, it came in bulk in later years, but in the first place it all came in drums and casks, you see, and it had to be melted out. So you had, in the melting out plant we call it, there was a chap named Jack Pickering and another chap named Bill Davis from Runcorn. Jack Pickering came from Cronton, I think, and they used to pull the casks up on top of tanks, you know what I mean, there were 2 tanks, and they had to roll them on top of the tank. See, there was floors like, but left a grid on the top, and they had to put a steam jet into the tank, into the drum, see, to melt the fat, and it run into the tank, you see. It ran into the tank. It was all worked out what fats they had to melt out, like it didn't matter if it mixed it in the tanks. They could put tallow, and they could put drums of coconut oil or palm bleach or groundnut acid oil or anything in the same tank, because it was going in the same pan, you understand, upstairs, because they then pumped it liquid, you see, when it was hot, with the steam going, melting the steam out, live steam through these jets, you see. They could put about three casks on at a time, or 6, you know, on 2 tanks. And of course, with live steam melting it, that turned into vapour and with water. So before they pumped it up, they had to run this water off the bottom of the tank, you see, into the grid, down the grid. And then when the fat come, they could pump it up into the pans, you see, and that was charged then, you see. Well, on the boiler was a fellow named Mick Walsh. He was from West Bank. He was an Irishman, see. And then we made soap powders as well, you see. So what you did then to make that, in that department, was a chap named Peter Lightfoot. He lived in Russell Street, Farnworth, and a fellow named Tommy Pickering, and he lived just in Bardick Street, higher up than I did. They were all ex-Gossage men, see. But in the powder department, the dry soap department you'd call it, see, well, when you made the soap in the pans, to where we made the soap powder was the hard way, really hard, because we had to pump, well, we used to pump, say, 1,500 weights of soap into this mixer, and then mix colour in it and everything, and then run it down the chute. A man stood on top of these frames, you see, as we called them, maybe 14 or 15 of these frames, and he pulled the plug out and let it into each frame. When one was full, he put a plug in and let it in the next. Well, with the soap powder, we would have to make different grades of powder, and the number 1 powder was the best. It had more soap in than others, you see. There was water softeners and things like that were mostly soda ash. Well, we'd pump so much, we'd have a measuring stick in this mixer, and we'd pump so much soap, brown soap, into this mixer, and then we'd add soda ash, you see, maybe 200 or 300 bits of soda ash, and a little amount of water, so much water, which was measured, you see, and it would then, as it mixed in with we'd run it down chutes and let it into a pit, and it would cool then overnight. We'd maybe do about 10 or 12 mixings of that, you know, several tons. And the next day they would cut it up with a spade into little, like you dig a garden. Then they'd pass it through what we call a kibbler that broke it up, and then passed it through into a mill which would grind it right into powder, you see a mill, and grind it into powder. But going back on my story of making the soap, I think I've forgotten, when we did make the soap down the chute into the ordinary household soap, you see, if you pumped it, this soap, when it's liquid, it starts to settle. You know what I mean? That means, as I said, in the pans. So when you've got it in the mixer and you get it down into those frames, you don't want it to settle anymore, you see, so you have to put a fixing solution in. So as well as colour or perfume, we used to put silicate in, a solution of silicate, you see. And this silicates of soda as a liquid used to go in, pump it in as a liquid, about maybe 2 inches on it, 2 inches in the mixer, and 1500 words, 12 or 1500 words of soap. And that solution was sufficient to stop that, once it was cooling, from settling anymore. That's why you had the solid block of soap, you see. We didn't there was such a thing one time in Gossages. They used to make, William Gossage, they used to make what they called, I forgot it. They used to put blue in the soap, and they used to dolly blue, and they used to blue mottle. But that used to settle in the frames. That you had to stop the frames from cooling too quick, so that the spots would not go to the blue would not go to the bottom. This was an idea of sort of giving you colour.
Did the Widnes Soap Company do that?
No, it's a complicated process. We just made the household soap.
What were the working conditions like? Good or?
We had no proper places like canteens or anything. We never had a canteen. We just had our own by the side in the boiler house. We used to sit and have our meal sandwiches, no canteen or anything like that.
What about safety?
The safety was reasonable, but it wasn't what you'd call safety, you know. I mean, you had to you'd have to send word if the factory inspector was coming unknown, you know. You had a caustic, which was very dangerous, really. It was in a floor in the ground. We had 3 tanks. The ICI used to deliver caustic, and it was delivered into 3 tanks, you know what I mean, round enclosed tanks. And from those we had to run into a measuring tank, which was in the ground with a lid on, you know what I mean. Used to pump it up to the pans. The pump was running all the time to pump up to the pans, you see. Later on we had a tank header tank in the pan room, which we stored it in, you know, we gravitated it into the pans. But very often this tank wasn't covered up, it was open, you know what I mean. You could walk in it, anybody. So it really had a lid on. It had a lid on, but we had to open the lid to fill it, really. You know what I mean? And it was consequently sometimes only half or cross or anything. But things like that, you know, when you're talking about safety.
Did anyone ever get hurt?
No. We did have an amusing incident. Really, one lad fell into a tank. This Lee, spent Lee. It's slightly caustic. You know what I mean? It's slightly caustic. It would irritate. You know what I mean? Now, when you pump these lees into this tank, you know what I mean, you know, into the tank, obviously you pump it until your soap comes, you know what I mean, and then you've got to blow that out with steam, live steam, through your pipes, as that would go solid in your pipes, wouldn't you? You know what I mean? So you've got to put, like, you have lime steam connected. You shut your tap off, you see, on the pan. You stop your pump, shut your pan, tap off. You're pumping the ley off, you see, with a pump into this tank. Now, as soon as you see it changing colour, or the soap comes, you see, you've got to stop your pump, go down, shut the bottom of your pan off, which you've pumped from the bottom of the pan, the ley, you see. And then you've got to blow that line out, but you usually change the taps round and blow it into the soap pan, you see, that it's come from, you see, or the nearest one that's suitable, you know, that won't matter what's in the line, you see. Well, obviously, you get a slight crust on the top of this, you know, forming, you know what I mean, which is a poor sort of soap, really, you know. So you've got to keep clearing this. So we had this tank we had. It had planks across the top, you know what I mean. You used to have to get on the top of this tank with a shovel, and we used to have a chute across from this tank to the nearest pan, which we kept at a pan for, not what you call an inferior soap, one that didn't matter. It was carbolic, which is coloured red. Now you can camouflage carbolic soap by all your odds and sods and your brushings up and your scrap and all sorts can go in that, because it cleaned up, it's pure cleaned up. But if the colour was off, you know what I mean, as I said in the first place, if you have, to get a good coloured soap, you have to have white fats and bleach fats. Obviously, all your brushings up and your scrap and that, the colour is gone, you see what I mean? So you can throw it in one pan and make an inferior soap with it, you see. Just as good as a soap, but it's slightly coloured, like, so you can colour it red. Well, we had a chute across.
What was used to colour?
Eh?
What was used to make it red?
Well, we used to use rhodamine colour. For green, we used to use oil-soluble green. And for the other soaps, slightly yellow soap, iodine. These, the red you had to mix with acid. See, you had to mix the rhodamine. You mixed it with crucilic acid with it in a pot, which you had to put so much. And when you're weighing it out, you know what I mean. You had to be careful because your tongue went red or your tongue went yellow. You know what I mean? The oil-soluble green wasn't so bad, but the chrysidine and the rhodamine were powerful stuff. They used to come in sealed tins, and you had to weigh it out on a scale how much, and then mix it in this acid, you see, with a stick. And after you'd weighed out a few bits, afterwards your tongue was red, you know, which was bad. And but we used to use this and weigh it out, you see, we heat that up and use just put a little bit into the mixer to colour it. But that was done in the mixers. But we had to get on the top of this tank and cut this crust and throw it into the pan, you see, to keep the ley clear, you see. Otherwise you keep having the crust on it and you have no room for ley, you see. But while it was full, you could skim it off the top, you see. As I say, and then Pickford used to take about 10 tons at a time of this liquor and to Crossfields. But later on we had our own gristling plant, which we did. But we did make another kind of soap, which was for, it was a liquid soap. And White's of Ditton Road, the oil people used to buy it off us. We'd only made small quantities, about 1,800 weights at a time we used to make for them in about 6 drums, you know, like liquid soap, red liquid soap. And that was made with potash, caustic potash. We had to use potash instead of caustic for that, caustic potash. And it was like water standing up really, but there's only about 7 or 8 pounds of fat in, groundnut oil we used to put in, and palm kernel oil I think, and we used to make this, and we used to colour that red, you know, but that was liquid. It was run out. It was hot and run into the drums liquid. It just went slightly like jelly. You know what I mean? That they could get out of the drum. You know what I mean? Tip out of the drum. It was just like a. You know, I don't know whether you've ever seen this liquid soap that you used to. They used to wash it, use it for. I don't know what they used to use it for.
Were you saying somebody fell in?
Hey? Well, no, you couldn't fall in the stands because one time a lad did fall in that tank. He was a huge lad. He should never have been working there. He was big, and he was totally. Whoever sent him to our department should never have sent him, because I didn't want him to do it. You know what I mean? Because he must have been about 20 stone. You know, like Fatty Arbuckle. I won't mention his name. I could tell you his name, but I won't mention it. And these going back on this story, they even put him on the top of these frames. They used to stand on the top of these boxes, metal boxes, and run this liquid soap down the chute, you see, and take the plug out. As it filled up, you put the plug in and took the other one out, and it ran into the next one. You had to stop and move the stop down, you know what I mean? About 10 or 12 holes down. Well, he had a scraper, see, in between each mixing. He used to scrape the soap down so it wouldn't go cold, you see, you know what I mean? What was left, while he made another mixing, see, while he filled up and made another mixing. Well, I was on the mixer sending this stuff down, and I sent one lot down and several lots down, and this lad was on the frames. He should never have been on them, you see what I mean? And evidently he dropped his scraper in an empty frame. Well, instead of leaving it there, he gets himself in the frame, you see, and he's stuck. And I heard this shouting and shouting. I looked through the hole. There's a hole in the wall you could see through, you know, into the next department. And these fellas are shouting to me. So I went to the hole and I said, "What's the trouble?" They said, "Norman's fell in the frame." And he'd got himself in this empty frame. And there's about 3 of them on the top trying to lift him out. And it's about 5 foot high, and he's 20 stone trying to pull him out. I said, "Well, why don't you pull the empty frame out? Take the side off and let him step out." You know what I mean? Oh, aye. So they did, you know what I mean? Well, on another occasion, he was on this tank and he fell in. Well, he was so big a lad that his shirt and his clothes were dead tight on him. Well, I was boiling a pan, you see what I mean? And I heard him fall, and I ran across, and I jumped on the tank, and I grabbed him and put his arms round the plank, you see, and shouted, and I think there's a girl in the lab at that time, I forget who she was, a girl in the lab. She come to the door, and she said, "What's the matter?" I said, "Go and get somebody," see. Oh, and she runs downstairs to the lads in the soap department, shouts, "Come quick, the big fellas fell in the tank." And about 3 or 4 of them dashed up the stairs, jumped on the tank and tried to get him out. And what amused me, one of the rescuers fell in. You know what I mean? So they had to take him they took him downstairs and washed him, you know, put a hose pipe on him and washed him that, and because he stood there. You know, he was weak caustic in his eye, they frightened of his eye and bathed his eyes, and he whipped him to Western Hospital, you know. He was all right, but he was totally misplaced, you know what I mean? And that's one of the, you know, the amusing incidents that happened. But it was an accident like that, you know. But
do you know where the soap was sent to? You know, was it just Merseyside or all over England, or?
You what?
You know, the soap,
oh
was it
well,
sent to?
we started off with locally. See, they had 2 travellers. One was a chap named Harry Daintith. He lived somewhere around Falmouth here somewhere, Harry Daintith. And the other chap was a chap named Leggett. And they were the travellers. I don't know what district they did, but they travelled England like. We didn't do abroad, anything like that, you know. Eventually we got, I say, these toilet business from London and places. But local, they did a lot of collieries, you know. It got a lot of work from the collieries for soap, because in those days they didn't have pithead baths, you see. As the miners come off the shift, they were given a tablet of soap, you know what I mean, at the pithead. And they used to go home, and you probably heard about having a bath in front of the fire in a tin bath and that sort of thing. But all of a sudden, one time, we suddenly lost this trade for the miners, you know what I mean. You used to send a lot to Doncaster, I think, or Darlington or somewhere, and it was distributed from there, you know what I mean. But they suddenly lost this trade, and what it was, they'd put pithead baths up, you see, and the miners coming off the ship went into the pithead bath and had a bath before they went home, so consequently we lost the trade, you see, you know, in that respect. That was later on, but mostly a lot of the Ideal Laundry used to take a couple of hundred weights of soap powder a week, and Ralph Rogerson, the carrier of Falmouth, he was the man that did the carrying, and there was another one, Jack Ducker. He used to have a coal business as well, Jack Ducker, and he had a horse and cart then, in the first place. But the thing was that Ralph Rogerson did all round. His son did it afterwards. He lives in Derby Road now, Brian Rogerson.
Was there any change in production in the wartime?
Well, the difference was that we were classed as a essential industry because we were producing glycerine, you see. You know, we were producing the glycerine which went to Crossfields. No, not a lot really. You know, we still produce soap, but mainly the idea was to get as much glycerine as could. That was where the idea of using weaker leads instead of water came in, you see, from their idea, you see. But I used to do fire watching, you know, and we only used to be one on a night, you know what I mean, only one person on a night, and I was on the night that landmine dropped on Marshall Road. It took the roof off the factory. I was in that night by myself.
Did the works have any social?
No, there was nothing.
No.
We didn't have anything. No, they didn't. There was no activities by the firm at all, really. You know.
Do you know the names of the people who formed the Widnes Soap Company?
Yes, it's all in that booklet. It's all in here. It was the Gossages men who did it. Yeah, there was. You mean who do you mean?
There were two men who formed it.
Well, there was the board. You know, there was Mr. Bloomer. He lived at Halsby, and the man who was the manager, works manager, was Reg Cartwright. He lived in Norlands Lane, and the other chap who was the foreman in the pan room was Eric Merrin. Eric Merrin. He was the man in the foreman and Len Bennett. He was the secretary. Len Bennett. He was from Warrington. He was an accountant, and of course there was. Mr. Wright, he was an active director there. He had an office, and Bloomer was the two men who was in the factory itself. Dr. Wigner, he was the man supposed to be in charge with all the ideas, but some of his ideas weren't very good. Everything was done the hard way, you know what I mean? I mean, everything that wasn't pumped up into the pan room. I mean, obviously when you cut soap, you get the ends of the bars, slabs, and the top, which was rough, that had to all go back to the pan, you know what I mean? Now all this scrap had to be pulled up by a rope and pulley from the ground floor into the pan room, you know what I mean? And all the salt you used had to be pulled up. We used to we used to cut the ends off metal drums, you know, the metal drums, 40-gallon drums, and put 2 handles on them, and we used to put the scrap in that and pull it up, you know what I mean? And salt, all your salt had to be pulled up like that. Everything that was hand-balled up, they had no lift or anything, was pulled up by hand. 2 men at the bottom and 1 on the middle landing, and you swung it over. You had to push it over and land it onto a top landing. You ever see pictures of the pan room? So everything had to be pulled, everything was hand-balled up what you didn't pump up, you know, like caustic, brine, water. Everything was pulled up. Eventually, you see, we used to buy the salt. We used to use about 6 tons of salt a week.
Where was that from?
Salt Union, Runcorn, well, Cheshire salt. That used to be delivered by a flat wagon and thrown in. And we used to have a tank we had air blowing into it, you know, and filled it with water and throw this salt in to make brine. But we used to use a lot of salt as it was on the shell and just flick it in, you know what I mean? See what you've got. Well, I don't know what I used about a load of salt a week, but when we got our own glycerin plant, we only used about 2 loads a year because you recovered all your salt back again, you see. You know what I mean? Later years, going on to that, we got a double effect glycerin plant, see. Now, all this ley that we used to send to Crossfields, you'd get it up to about 6%, and we'd run it down into storage tanks, you see, into a tank. We had 3 tanks that held about 10 ton, and we had air blowing into it, you see, the first tank, and we used to put hydraulic acid in it to neutralise any caustic that was in it, depending a bottle or half a bottle or 2 bottles, to neutralise that, you know what I mean? And we put alum in it, and then we filtered it through a filter press. It was forced through cloths on a press to get all the residue out, you know, all the impurities and everything out of this ley. And he used to film a cake in between the plates, and dropped it out and shoveled it away onto the tip. And then it was passed into the second tank. As it passed into the second tank, that was treated with slight caustic, you know, to bring it to caustic. And then it filtered again. I think it was caustic we treated with, into the third tank, and that was the storage tank. And from that, we could run a day, see, and it'd be about, we'd fill the first vessel, you see, by gravity. There's a vacuum, it's all on a vacuum, see, done by vacuum, a vacuum pump. It sucked it in, filled it in, you see, and we boiled it with live steam. Now that was evaporating, see, and as it evaporated you kept adding more in all the day, you see, but the steam of it went over on the vacuum, went over and boiled the second one. See what I mean? Because you passed it over in, you see. You filled one and then filled the other, and one boiled the other, double effect, and the vapour from the second one went into a condenser and down the drain. Well, he kept on using all this ley, 6 to 7% ley, all day, about 10 tons or more, see. But you mustn't get any salt. See, you evaporate and you get your salt, there's all salt in that, you see, which you've grained out, which you're getting back, you see. So you had, on the second effect, you had a salt box, see, with the valve open. So you mustn't get any salt in the first effect. It must be passed into the second, you see. You kept, with the 2 valves, filling the first and letting it into the second and keeping the level up all the time. See the level boiling, you kept the level up all the time. But you mustn't get any salt in the first one. But your second one is getting stronger and stronger and stronger, and it's separating salt, and that's dropping out into the box below, you see. So after about halfway through the day, you would shut that box off and blow the liquor out of it back up into the top. You see what I mean? With steam, blow the liquor back up into the top into your second effect, and keep on boiling the other one as well. See, because it's still boiling. And you dry that salt for about. You could see the liquor being pushed out through the glass ports on the side, and you dry it for about 10-20 minutes, you see, and then you could open the door and shovel that out. Hot salt, you see, warm white salt, slightly discoloured, and you put that on one side, you see, and then during the day you get another salt box. You get about 1200 weight of salt, you see, and at the end of the day all you'd got left was a solution of glycerin. So you watch your temperature going up and up and up on it, you see, till it got to about 92 or 94, I think, and you shut everything off, see, open your tap at the bottom and ran this glycerin liquor, hot liquor, into a storage tank, you know what I mean, but there was salt in that as well, see, slight salt, so that would settle overnight, see, and the next day you would pump about 1,000 weights, half a tonne out of all that 20 tonne, about half a tonne of crude glycerin, which was brown, like a brown oil, you know what I mean, into the next tank, you see, and that would settle a bit there. And you keep on, after about a week, you know, if you'd run 2 or 3 days and you got about 30 weight of 2 tonnes in this second tank, that would even settle a bit of salt, you see. So you pumped all that off. You pumped that off into some other storage tanks we'd got, you see, and then from there you drummed it, see, you run it into drums, and we used to send that, I don't know where that went to, but it was to making either lipsticks, cosmetics, or glycerin, or medicated glycerin. If they purified it, it could make medicated glycerin, you see, it purified. I don't know where that went, but that was the process of that.
Do you know any of the brand names for the soap?
Well, the brand name was was a very poor name. It was called Non-Com. The idea of that, I think, came from the idea that all these men from Gossages, Bloomer and Widnes and Mr. Wright and all those fellas, they'd all been belonging to the Lever Combine, and the Levers had shut Gossages down, you see what I mean? Lever Brothers had shut Gossages down, you know what I mean? And put them all out of work, sort of thing. So the idea of a non-com was that it was a non-combined, you know, in terms of there's no combination with anybody else. We did make, later on, they had their own. They didn't, it was just made 2X Pearl and Carbolic and all like that, you know what I mean, but we didn't make toilet soap there until years and years afterwards, you know, after the war, you know, long after the war. You see, there was a firm in Manchester, is it still recording? There's a firm in Manchester called Hazelwood's, and Reg Harding, the foreman, he used to be a Manchester person in his youth, and he told me that in his youth Hazelwood's was a household name in Manchester. You know, it's on all the buses and all the trams or whatever it was, you know, it's a household name. But gradually, I think the old man who built the business up, his 2 sons fritted the money away and never bothered about the business. It constantly went down and down and down, until eventually we were looking for an outlet for our toilet thing, and we were supplying them with the salt flakes. Ralph Rogerson used to take them to Patsicroft, Manchester, to be made into toilet soap, and eventually they brought that plant here, you know what I mean, and that the end building, mind you, don't forget that we hadn't got any maintenance. We did our own maintenance. I mean, if anything broke down, we mended it. If a pump broke down, we took it to pieces and mended it. If pipework wanted putting up, we did it. You know what I mean? I mean, I did it and other fellas. We did the Adel Starmer and me, and I mean, if a tap broke on the bottom of anything, you had to take it out and put it in. You see, this liquor used to rot the pipes, So you'd have to we had to screw a piece of pipe, 3-inch piping, by hand, with no machinery, or 2-inch piping, and measure a new length, and put flanges on it, and put it in and bolt it in a new length or anything, you know. And when anything modernisation that we did in terms of putting a pump in to pump stuff, and even put a tank up in the air, we did in the pan room. So that you see, when we was saponifying a pan, you might be taking you 2 or 3 hours to do it, you know what I mean? So you had a pump down in a building 50 yards away, running all the time, you know what I mean, while he was using, you know. So what we decided to do was put a tank in the pan room and just fill it, so that it was connected to, you had three taps on your pan, you see. You had water, caustic and brine, you see. So instead of having the pump running all the time, you could fill the storage tank and just gravitate it, you see, into the pan, you see. You could measure it as much as you wanted, and that might do enough to do the pan, you see. But anything like that, and to put the pipe work to it, or from it, and to the pans and everything like that, we did. As I say, the end shed that was eventually going to turn into a toilet department, and the glycerin plant, which you've got a photo of in here, we concreted the whole of that floor by knocking buildings down at the bottom of the round the works, walls down and filling in, and then concreted it in sections on a Saturday morning with the concrete mixing, did a section at a time. And as I say, we fixed all that up and did all the piping for this toilet process and everything, and all the wiring, the electric wiring. From the Mersey Power come and put a substation in and a buzz bar, and from that we put the switches on the grid and took all the conduit piping, screwed the conduit piping, put all the wires through, under supervision, mind you, you know what I mean? But we had to do it. And then and when he tried it with the Meg and say it, and if it was going the wrong way around, I said change 2 wires round and it'll go the other way. You know what I mean? And the water, see, they had to have water for this toilet process as well, and took water pipes and there was a false ceiling because it had to be, you know, put a tap on the plodder here, and then get up on a ladder and put a piece of string, you know what I mean, a nut on the end of it, and then shove a hole through the ceiling and bring a pipe through it, you know what I mean. But we did all the maintenance, as I said, if anything, got to mend it.
Do you know if there was any connection with the Granics?
Yes, there was. That was the fault, because they put money into the firm at first, you see, and the wagon, before we got Ralph Rogerson and Jack Ducker, they used to send their wagon and do a bit of delivering. Well, it arrived at the factory with maggots crawling all over it and bones on it, you know, from like boneyard down the dock. There was sacks of bones on, and we'd put cases of soap on that, and he was going to shops in Widnes delivering them. Well, imagine a wagon pulling up outside the shop with a bag of bones on and maggots sort of dropping off on the floor. When he'd gone, there was maggots on the floor crawling around. With the lads, the fishermen used to pick them up, you know, the lads that were doing fishing, and he'd put them in a tin box. And this oil-soluble green and rhodamine colour, used to put a spit of this colour in the tin box, and as the maggots crawled down, they'd colour them. They had coloured maggots for fishing, you know. But that, and so it was terrible. And I remember one time they had a Widnes carnival, and I was only a lad. I was only 14, 15, you know, then when this was happening. And this wagon had come and look, and the fellow had been delivering bones. He couldn't get the smell off it, you know what I mean. And this fellow that was a driver, he come to go in the carnival with it, with the same wagon, and we had to go on. They put some, decorated the wagon up, you know what I mean, and scrubbed it, supposed to be, but it stunk to the high heaven. And we was in this carnival, and I was on it, and I had to throw my trouser away to do with kneeling down on it. All this smell was in me things, and it was terrible. We had fishing lines, I think, you know, for people, fishing nets for people giving money for the carnival, and it had non-com and on the, you know, on the wagon, and two girls who was in there who used to pack this powder. They worked for Granix, actually, I think. No, they didn't. They worked for. Anyway, Granix put the money in it, but so they had they put money in it and they had contact with it, but it ruined the business in terms of Widnes, you know what I mean, because of this wagon, you know what I mean, until we got organised with Ralph Rogerson, and he used to do the local deliveries and that.
Why do you think the Widnes Soap Company closed down?
Because it couldn't compete. It hadn't got the money to spend to compete with Levers and that, you know what I mean. We could only do the business that they didn't want, you know what I mean. I mean, we made Thomas Headley. That's Thomas Headley and Sons, you know what I mean. That's the big fairy factory. Yeah, we used to do some guest tablets for them. You know these little guest tablets that you get when they had the toilet firm here. Milady, it was called. Milady. If you go in a hotel, you get about a 3-ounce tablet or a 1-ounce tablet. But they didn't want to be bothered with things like that. So they give Hazelwoods the dyes, you know, and we did the job for them, you know, and made these guest tablets, and they were stamped, you know what I mean, guest tablets for hotels and things like that, you know. But no, the idea was, when it first started, that these men like Jack Pickering, Bloomer, Wigner and all them fellas, and George McKagan and that anybody that went into it would carry it on and learn from their experience, you know what I mean. But it didn't prove the case, you know what I mean. There was a lot of trouble later on. 1 or 2 of the key men left, and I was one of them. You know what I mean? I'd done everything.
What post did you hold then? What were you then? What post did you have? You know, manager, were you a manager then or what?
But what?
Were you a manager?
No, I wasn't. I was only. I was supposed to be a supervisor sort of thing. I never got to be a foreman or anything, because you see there were so few people that it wouldn't pay to make the doers bosses, because the people under them couldn't do it. You know what I mean? If you've got people that can do a job, the fellow that can't do it will be promoted above him, because he's the fellow that can do it. You know what I mean? In that respect. So I'd gone through the soapery. I ran the flaking machine. Then I went into the pan room and I made the soap for years and years. And then years later, they gave me the choice of staying there. And other people come in. They brought a fella in from Warrington who had been a manager at Widnes Soap Works in the West Indies, and he was trapped there during the war, but he had been the manager there, and he came from Warrington, and he started doing the boiling so I decided to go on this glycerine plant because it was a new thing, you see what I mean, and I went on that and ran that, and I was supposed to be in charge really in terms of supervising what went on, you know what I mean. His name was Bill Hall, this fella from Warrington, and he was an elderly man, but he was slightly older than me actually. But having said that, Harold Starmer left, and then Reg Harding left. He had a bit of trouble, so his son, who was worked there, he left, and I had a bit of trouble and I left. So we all left, really, you know.
When did you leave?
I wasn't backed up by the management in the end, you know what I mean. The management didn't back me up in some of the things that I was doing with certain people who were doing what they wanted. You know what I mean? And we wasn't, when I objected to them doing what they wanted, they didn't back us up, so I left under that respect.
And when was that?
That was in 1964. I'd been there 31 years then. 31 years. I left 1933 to 1964.
And when did the soap company close down?
About 12 months after I finished, it closed down. They had problems afterwards. They were losing the money in some respects, because where I was getting a good yield of glycerin from the lees, they were losing it, because if you're not careful, instead of it stopping in the tank, these clever fellas tried to bore it too hard. You're evaporating your glycerin off down the drain. You see, instead of clear steam water going down the drain out to your second effect, you were losing your glycerin and you get nothing. See, and that's where the money was. See, it was eventually, I don't know what happened, but they closed down.
You know, when the company started off, was there any machinery in the building?
No. It'd been a sail making place originally, but it was all flag floors and everything, and the building adapted it to. No, they put 5 soap pans in, and there was only primitive machines. Only all done primitive. I mean, you cut the soap, when the blocks of soap, you cut it with what we call the banjo, which was a wooden frame with a wire across. You know, and you adjusted the thickness of your bar, you see, to what you wanted. You see, if you wanted a thin tablet, and you cut it in a slab, you see, and you had to pull it by hand. You get about 20 slabs out of a frame of soap, you see. Then you have to put it on a machine. You'll see it in here if you look at this. Have you seen one of these?
No.
Well, of course you can. Stop your machine a minute now. We used to make soap that didn't lather. If it lathered, they sent it for wire drawing. But when they're drawing wire out, I've never seen it done, but I believe that when they're drawing wire, there's Warrington Fireworks and that, they had to have something to run the wire over. Otherwise it'd go flat, wouldn't it, as it, you know, hit the floor. So they put bars of soap, and it ran over these, and it lubricated it and cooled it. And we also made stuff. We also made a wax pearl, we called it, and it was made out of tallow and resin. You know, resin. It used to come in casks and break up. And you saponify, you put the rosin in the pan, you see, and it was a softish, and it was used by Mobile Company, the Mobile Company of Birkenhead, I think, and it used to go to make grease. They used to make it, and we used to sell it in half slabs. We used to cut the slabs in half and pack them in bags, 4 half slabs. You know those slabs you can see on that machine? We used to we had another frame, a wooden frame we made, with a wire across, and we used to put it on the top of the frame and push it right down, you see, so they cut it then into 2 blocks. Well, when you cut the slab then across, you had 2 half slabs, and they used to pack it in 4 in a bag, and the Mobile Company used to come with a wagon and pick about 5 tons up at a time and take it to, you know.
Do you know where the machinery came from?
I forget the name now. It's on the tip of my tongue and I can't think of it.
None of it was from Gossages. No?
Well, Forshaw's was one that made the stamping machine. Hanson and Edwards made a lot of the stuff. Don't know where they were from, but it was Hanson and Edwards, yeah.
So there was none from Gossages? Or that
Oh, nothing from Gossages. Not a stick came from Gossage, only the men.
Do you know anything about old terms like crutching and plodders and anything like that? Can you just...
Well, crutching was when the soap had run into these frames, you see, obviously you could get a few air bubbles in. So they had a long shaft with a flat metal plate on the bottom, and in between the mixings while they was filling up, the lad used to just put the plodder, and he used the crutcher, as they called it, and he used to just bump it up and down in the frame, and that would bring the bubbles to the top, so that when it cooled you'd see these bubbles on the top, you know, like you could crutcher was the what was crutching? Same thing, I think. What was mixed as crutching, and plodding. Well, the plodder was the thing where they used to put it in the mill, like, and plod it, you know.
Whereabouts was the lab in the building?
The lab was the end of the pan room. It was just a small room at the end, like an extension on the pan room.
Okay, yeah. Can you tell me, did you work anywhere else before the Widnes Soap Company? Or?
No, I didn't work anywhere else before that. From 1933 to 1964, 31 years. But only out of work from the Christmas to the May the 8th, 1933. I just did part-time in a milk round. That's all.
Okay, Mr. Bunt, that's great. Thanks very much.